to increase the accessibility of all our programs, our virtual programs will now have closed captioning. If you would prefer not to see the closed captioning, please hit the More button at the bottom of your screen and click on Hide Subtitles. Also, if everyone could mute their audio to provide a better listening experience for all of our attendees. And then, during these very difficult times that we have experienced as individuals and as a country, Sandy Spring Museum has experienced challenges, grappling with the role we play in a system that benefits some at the expense of others. Sandy Spring Museum stands firmly with those fighting against the racism, structural disadvantages, and systemic injustice that have oppressed Black people in the United States for hundreds of years. The United States was built on discriminatory practices that were codified in our legal system, beginning with the dehumanization of Native people, followed by enslaving Black people in bondage as property for the financial benefit of those of white European ancestry. Sandy Spring Museum stands on land that was once a plantation where Black people were enslaved. We recognize that the museum is a beneficiary of a historically unjust system and are committed to working towards dismantling systems that perpetuate racism and discrimination in order to build a just, equitable society. Tonight's program is one of many programs that we have that challenges the dominant narrative. And I will now introduce Cheryl Crim. Cheryl is an award-winning filmmaker and photographer living in Sandy Spring. Last summer, she released Resisterhood, a feature-length documentary about the power of women, hope, and resistance. Its aim is to fire people up to vote. The film was shared at the Sandy Spring Museum ahead of the 2020 elections. And I will now turn it over to Cheryl.
Thanks, Daria. It is great to be here. I'm very excited about this. My husband and I hardly ever miss a history happy hour. And this, of course, is our favorite museum. And I'm not only saying that because I live in Sandy Spring and they did show Resisterhood here virtually ahead of the last election. I did want to say that, well, when I was asked if I knew anybody who might be a good moderator for tonight's event, one person popped into my head immediately. And if you were here virtually for the Resisterhood event last, I think, October, then you already know her. This person she was born in Memphis, Tennessee. She marched from Selma to Montgomery for voter rights, and she has been marching ever since. She is an educator, she's a counselor, she is a historian, she is a poet, and she is an inspiration to everyone who meets her. I am proud to introduce our moderator for tonight, my good friend, Margaret Morrison. Take it away, Margaret.
Thank you, Cheryl. And good evening, everybody. The documentary we've all viewed, The 30th of May, has received 10 awards, including the September 2016 Gold Award, and has been televised on Mississippi television in May of 2017. Tonight, we are pleased to have with us the 30th of May's documentarian, Mr. James William Terrace, as our speaker. I have given him the title historian/archaeologist because he digs through America's historical archives, unearthing bits and pieces of our collective history, then reassembles these pieces to prominence through his amazing storytelling. An independent filmmaker, his 2018 award-winning film, The Hello Girls, showcased the unsung story of 223 United States Army women serving in France as telephone operators during World War I. The most recent screening of this film, The Hello Girls, occurred in France on November 11, 2018, 100 years after the end of that war. His recent film made a debut in 2019, a film about 855 Black women, the only all-Black female battalion during World War II, the 6,888th Central Postal Delivery Battalion, which gives this award-winning film its name, 6888. We see in each of his documentaries a picture of who we are as Americans, ordinary, everyday men and women doing extraordinary things, at times under the most blatant sexist and racist practices and policies so prevalent in our world. Mr. Terrace is not only a documentarian, he's a speechwriter who supports the Undersecretary for Memorial Affairs Administration, an agency within the Veterans Administration. He has earned his bachelor's in history at the University of Wisconsin, has a master's in history from Jackson State University, and has a master's in business administration from the Cardinal Stritch University in Milwaukee. This Wisconsin native is a Green Bay Packers fan.
Yes.
And is a proud owner of a 1998 95th anniversary edition of Harley Davidson Softail.
Looking at it right now.
Ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome Mr. James William Terrace.
Thank you. Goodness. Thank you, Miss Margaret. I want to start with the ladies first. Laura, Daria, Cheryl, and Miss Margaret for that wonderful, kind introduction. You know the old story. I think we've all heard it. I think Dr. King was the one that made it famous. Is that when a person when he was getting introduced, I think one time, and someone was saying all those nice things, he looked around and wondered who that person was talking about. And so I thank you very much for that introduction. And thank you, Sandy Springs Museum. I'm thinking that the best way to get going, and I think it's okay if you, as a question pops up and you want to ask it because it's something that I may not have covered or that needs a little bit more clarity, I'm open to that. But let's start really 20 years ago, if I may. I had just gotten out of the military. I was in the process of being divorced, and I had 2 young children, and I ended up going back to my home state of Wisconsin, kind of start my life over again. And so I remember meeting up with an old college buddy, and we got onto the subject of, you know, how would you do it differently if you could? And he said his thing, and when it got to me, I told him, I said, his name was Jimmy Murphy. I said, Jimmy, I would go back to school to be a filmmaker. I would want to learn that. And he said, well, it's never too late. I was like, well, you know, I was 34, 36, somewhere in that framework. And I, you know, with young children, you know, you got to take care of those young children. And so any luxuries in your life really maybe have passed you by because they become your priority. And so I got into filmmaking completely by accident. And I have to thank Jackson State University for that accident. I had always wanted to get a master's in history. And I had, as you mentioned, and then I got an MBA because I was in the business world, and that didn't help me any. But I wanted that master's in history. And I caught a break when I was with the Department of Veterans Affairs now. It's about the 4th or 5th year. I've been with them a little over 12 years now. And I caught a break when I got stationed in Jackson, Mississippi. worked for the medical center down there as a public affairs officer. And I looked around, and there's a lot of, you'd be surprised, a lot of universities in Jackson, 10, 12, Tougaloo, Mississippi College, some others. And, but Jackson State caught my eye because I went and visited their department. Was supported, it was like, yeah, this is the place to be. And I'll tell you why and what I learned about Jackson State. First of all, and let me say this in a self-deprecating manner, but I kind of mean it. I thought, well, I was going to go to Jackson State, and I was, you know, almost 50 years old and had a good job, and I was going to be the smartest guy in the classroom. But I found out that I wasn't. And I learned so many things at such a different level. And the most important thing I learned and took away from Jackson State is that in every department, no matter the discipline, their focus was on cultural and social history. You're in the computer class, you were going to learn about the social and cultural history of the city of Jackson. And so that was new to me, because this wasn't a history degree focused on the presidents, focused on the military, focused on the government. This was going to be a history degree about people. And I really, I take that with me, and I've talked to my professors, and in fact, I just talked to a former classmate today and via Facebook, and we shared some memories. But that's what led me into filmmaking, because a whole new world was opened up to me. And I saw that, you know, from a university deep in the South that had a great reputation, but also, and it was also on the cutting edge of a lot of what was happening in the civil rights era. I got to know and befriend a young man by the name of James Meredith. I found out pretty quickly that I was talking about him one day. I said, well, I'd like to meet him. And some friends of mine at the Jackson VA says, oh, just go up to the Kroger on I-55. And he sits there and has coffee every morning till about noon. So I remember the first time I met him, and there he was, this titan, this incredibly courageous man, and he's humble. He had his painter pants on, and his red University of Mississippi hat, and that's how I first met him. And we became friends. It was kind of like I would just go there to listen to him, and I would always implore him, please let me nominate you for the Jackson VA Wall of Honor, because we do that for veterans. And he to this day, he still says no. And I'm going to go see him in about a couple of months. But there was him. And then, you know, I'll stay, before we get to the filmmaking, I'll stay with the job at the medical center. So when I got there, I launched a program called the Wall of Honor. And I had taken that idea from the Toma, Wisconsin VA Medical Center. And what it was is people could nominate veterans either for their military service, their awards and things they did in the military, or the one piece I added to that is after military service. Because the truth is most veterans do their most important work after they get out. And I was thinking specifically of the Evers brothers, Medgar and Charles Evers. A lot of folks didn't know, and I didn't know either until I researched it, that both Medgar and Charles Evers served in the Army during World War II. Medgar was in, he didn't land on D-Day, he was D-Day plus a couple of days, but he fought with the Army all throughout the European campaign. And Charles was in the Pacific, also in the Army, but in the Pacific. So when I launched this program, someone nominated the two of them, and we had 8 that year. It was inaugural year. Told the director, I said, let's just do all 8. He's like, yeah, that's a good idea. So we get to the day, or we get close to the day, and I knew that Mrs. Evers, was down at Alcorn State again and teaching. So I said, well, because I wanted a presenter to present the people of this first class. So I called Alcorn State, and they patched me through, and picked up the phone. I'm on the phone, and I hear this on the other end. I almost fainted. Hi, this is Mrs. Evers. And I said, it's Mrs. Evers on the phone. What do I say? It was just so powerful for me. And I said, ma'am, I'm surprised that, you answered your phone, or, that someone isn't answering the phone for you. She goes, no, I always answer my own phone. How can I help you? Well, I told her about her husband, Medgar, being nominated for the Wall of Honor, and that we were asking presenters to come in and to, present them. And then we would have the formal induction ceremony, a nice plaque and all that. So she said, November what? I said, November 10th. She goes, you know what? I'm free that day. I'll be there. I was like, oh, wait a minute now. Hold up. Is my tie on right? I mean, this is royalty of Mississippi. And Charles Evers too was there. So it was a packed house. I promoted it. The fire department told me that if I ever have packed 500 people into a 300 person room again, that they'd be giving me a stern talking to. But so we go through the program, and I set it up, and I'll get to the filmmaking, I promise. I set it up where I wanted the presenters. I talked to the presenters, and I said to them, okay, so each of you have about 5 minutes to talk about the person you're inducting, and then we'll go through the induction. So, knowing a little bit about stagecraft, I had Mrs. Evers sitting right center in the front row. And we're getting ready to start the program, and she calls me over. She said, Jim. So yes, ma'am. She said, now, Jim, tell me again about those 5 minutes. And I said, Mrs. Evers, I put you last for a reason. She goes, got it. Folks, she spoke for 25 minutes. Nobody left. When I introduced her, I was at the lectern. She was maybe 10 feet from me, and it was the same level. It wasn't a stage, same level floor, and I could barely get the words out, really. And when I introduced her, she walked up. I exited stage right, and what overwhelmed me was the deafening silence. People stopped breathing as she walked to the lectern and spoke for 25 minutes. And I knew it was going to be a fascinating 25 minutes, because here's how she started. She said, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very honored to be here. And I'm going to share with you things about Medgar that I've never told anywhere. And I was like, wow. So it was about his military history. And the fact that, in her words, he went off the war and came back a man. And that the most interesting thing that she can remember about him from the war as a soldier was, one, that this was the first time ever he was recognized for his military service, was by us. And the other thing is, and she said it with a little grin, and it was the Army that taught him how to organize. So that took me on the path. That type of history in Mississippi started to double over into my schoolwork. And there was just so many of these happenings. And I remember it was time to do my graduate project. This is about 2015 now. It's about time to do the graduate project. And I turned in something, and I thank goodness for my senior professor. He gave it back to me and said, you can do much better than that. And I was at that time then I had already come to Washington, D.C., but I was doing the work via, via long distance learning. And so I went back to the headquarters in D.C., VA, and I was really disappointed. I was talking to a friend of mine, said, man, I spent a week there and I still don't have a project. And he said, he goes, I'm not sure about all the details, but he said, 2 years ago, I spoke at the National Cemetery there, Natchez, and he said, I think they've been doing some type of march or some type of celebration for 100 years. And I was like, wow. So I looked into it. I called the then director down there, Sheila Davis. And I said, Sheila, and we didn't know each other before this, but I said, hey, I heard this, and what do you know about this? She said, well, I grew up in Natchez, and she was about 50 at the time. I grew up in Natchez, and I remember them doing it ever since I was a kid. And I said, wow, maybe I really got something here. So I went right back. 2 weeks later, I went back down there to talk to people, and I learned that indeed the generation after generation after generation of Black Americans from the Vidalia, Louisiana side of the river to the Natchez side of the river, which, as it came to families, were interchangeable. I mean, your brother might live, but they were very much a community. And I learned that indeed they had been marching for as long as anyone could remember. And one of the guys I talked to was 92-year-old Frank Williams, and you met him in the film. And he remembers as a young man marching in it. So that's okay. Now I really got something. And then, thank goodness for newspapers, because the newspapers of the time, I found those online, and they also chronicled this event. The first one happening actually on July 4th of 1866, and it happened every July 4th up until 1868, and then it was May 30th. And there was a reason for that. The community changed it to May 30th because one of the generals, a white general from the Union Army that was stationed there, had become the second commander of the Grand Army of the Republic. The political organization, American Legion, VFW, the GAR was the first of those. Well, that commander had declared May 30th Decoration Day. And so the entire community said, hey, we remember him, we respect him, that's the date. So they started celebrating there in Natchez on May 30th, which they did for about 100 years. And then somewhere in the 70s, May 30th, Memorial Day changed, all the holidays changed to the last Monday of the month. And even a while past that, the community was still like, no, we're going to honor May 30th. Well, then, modern jobs got involved. And so they just then started having their Memorial Day celebration. But if you notice and remember from the film, they still call it the 30th of May. I remember seeing all the red T-shirts and had 30th of May on it. And folks were so proud. And it was so cool to watch that being passed from generation to generation to generation. Sometimes not knowing why we're celebrating this, the younger folks, but we just know. And so I kind of believe in, the spirits and fate and everlasting life and all that. And I've always said about my films that I ultimately would get signs from either the women of the 6888, the women of the Hello Girls, and the folks of the 30th of May. And I originally was like, I had my paper written in April, and I was wondering what else can I or should I do? And my buddy, which I showed this, I'll show this in a minute, this poster, he said, well, we could film it. And I said, yeah, let's do that. So what sealed the deal for me about filming it is, one, the year 2016 was the 150th anniversary of these events, and that Memorial Day was May 30th. And I couldn't help but pay attention to that significance that it was showing me. Jim, you have to do this. You have to do it on this day. We're handing it to you because we call it the 30th of May. It's on May 30th. We'll see you there. So yeah, we decided to film it. And then even the filming part, talking about, you know, taking that next level, even the filming part, I was just going to turn in the raw footage. Say, here you go, someone else figure it out. But I was going to, you know, chronicle it and do the right thing. But then my buddy said again, hey, you know, we got a lot of good stuff here. You got interviews. You know, let's turn this into a documentary short, which is 40 minutes or less. I'm like, yeah, let's do that. And so we did it, and we did it from a distance, which was really kind of extra cool because I came back to DC to work and he lived in Jackson, and we would email back and forth. He'd do so much, and then he'd send it to me, and I tweak this, do that, a little bit of that. And then I would write things out in advance. Okay, this is what I want to do next. And so from a distance of, I don't know, what is it, Jackson to DC, couple 1,500 miles at least or something, we put that whole film together from that distance, which is another cool part of the story, I think. I don't see many heads nodding, but yeah, it's cool. I thought it was cool. It really was. And so then now we had this finished film, and then the question is, okay, now what? What do you do? Well, I said, well, let's enter it into a couple of film festivals. The first one that accepted us was a Black film festival from London, England. And that's when I said, wow, this is really getting more fun every day. And then I forget how, but the Mississippi Humanities Council had caught wind of the film and asked me to come in on one of the days next time I was down there, and sat down and said, hey, we really like this. Here's what we want to do. We want to air it on Mississippi Public Television, which I still think they still do. I gave them an unlimited license. So around Memorial Day, I think they still do it. And we're also going to give you some funds, a small amount of funds to go ahead and, you know, go to universities and talk about it. So I screened it at Jackson State. I screened it at Tougaloo College. I screened it down at Southern Miss. And so, you know, that became, and so by the time I had finished the film, understood really how to make a film, and knowing this first, folks, I will share with you, I always say this, I'm a historian first and a filmmaker second. And that's why I think I have a knack for, you know, picking a good story from the history perspective. I kind of know it when I see it. I know a good story when I see it. And the next two followed. And all three of these, I'll share with you, honestly, I caught lightning in a bottle 3 times in a row. It was just the reception that the films got at every level has been extraordinary. And by the time I was done with that whole cycle, we had made the film, we had done the interviews, we filmed the actual event, we put it together, and we started putting out to film festivals, started winning some awards. Well, by the time that whole cycle was done, was around the end of 2017. And I said, I want to do another one. And this equally was amazing. I came across the Hello Girls, and this was a story that had never been told. Miss Margaret, you mentioned something you said about me, and I wrote it down. I wrote what I say, but you said about digging in, as an archaeologist, digging into the history. And it's so amazing that you said that, because what I've often said about my company's vision is just that. You said it better than I did, so I'm writing that down. But I always called it, I look for stories that are stuck in the nooks and crannies of American history, and that they're about veterans who have, in most cases, at least in my film, have helped advance military and veteran service, and in particular, whether it was women veterans or Black American veterans, that that was what the glue that held it together. And that's where you mentioned that. I really appreciate that, because that's where I look for my stories. I did a World War I documentary. Peter Jackson did one too, but I just did a small piece of American history, and I don't have the resources to do something as big as he did. But you know what? I hope that I don't ever have those resources, because it is such a pleasure digging into these smaller pieces of history, knowing that that contribution that this small group made was as equal as to the what is off maybe termed a larger contribution. So it's very enjoyable to find those stories. I'm very grateful. People are always coming up to me and saying, I think they did it at the museum too. The last time we were there, they always capture me and they said, "Jim, boy, do we got a story for you." And so I always get a chuckle at that. But that's how I learned about the 6888. I was screening the Hello Girls across the country, and I was out in Arizona, and someone said, "Hey, have you ever heard of these Black World War II women?" I said, "Nope, I haven't." I went to another place, and someone else said, "Hey, have you ever heard?" And I said, "No, I haven't." But now, things are my ears starting to ring. I was in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, screening the Hello Girls. A lady came up to me and said, "Have you ever heard about these Black women who served overseas during World War II?" And I'm listening a little bit more intently, and then she says this, "And one of them lives here in Milwaukee." I knew I had a story. I knew right then I had a story. And what we ended up finding for the 6888 was 11 known survivors, of which there's only 7 now. We've lost 4 in the last 8 months. But that has been, folks, my journey from wishing when I was 36 that I would have trained to be a filmmaker, to then, technology being so readily available that 20 years later or 15 years later, I could actually do it. I didn't need to have this size. And so, fate played a role in that too for me, and that it wasn't as difficult to make a film. And it's even easier now. iPhones, you can do a film. And so that's my journey. I hope that's kind of what you were hoping to hear, Cheryl. I hope so. Daria, Miss Margaret, I hope that my intent was to take you on my journey. And this was my journey. And what I say to folks, especially to the younger crowds and the younger kids and students, I say, look, pay attention to your life. Pay attention to the things that are calling out to you, because it might come around one day and you want to be ready. And so that happened to me, folks. That is exactly what happened to me. And I want to share with you, I know we're talking about the 30th of May, I want to answer all those questions. What I want to share with you today, speaking of an incredible journey, 8 months ago, 2 producers from Broadway had a meeting with us over the computer and said, Jim, Edna, we want to turn the 6888 into a full-scale Broadway musical. You hear that all the time, right? Well, I'm not going to show you my email, but trust me when I tell you that we got an email today from them with a shopping contract, said, we want to move forward on this. We've talked to some prominent directors and producers, and we want to bring you 2 on as the historical advisors. It started by accident, folks. My career in filmmaking, and by the way, they want to make the 6888 into a feature film as well. This is all happening simultaneously. And I'm more grateful than anything because there have been people along the way, the people that I met, the women that I met, other people that I met, who have always kept me, and I hope it sounded this way because that was the intent, have always made sure that there was more humility than there was greatness, and that I know that the only way that this would ever have been successful is over all this time, meeting the folks from the 30th of May, the Hello Girls, and the women of the 6888, that it was the humility before them that allowed us to propel to the next level. And Edna and I often say, when something really quirky happens, this is the women again. This is them showing us the way because we couldn't get it right. And everything, folks, I just shared with you is a true story. It really is. That's how it happened. No embellishment on this resume. It just happened that way. And I'm very grateful for moments like this too. Very grateful. So I think are we at the 45-minute mark? I can take questions, or how would you like to proceed?
Yes, we are at 7:45. And thank you, Jim, for sharing that. That was really very interesting. And so, yes, we can take questions. People can feel free to type in the chat or to unmute themselves and ask a question that way.
I have a statement and a question.
Yes, ma'am.
What a wonderful storyteller you are. And I don't mean storytelling as telling tales, but digging into the trueness of what has happened in America and bringing it to light so that all of us understand that each person participates in our representative government and we make it a better place. But we have lost so many of the true history, and it's people like you and like Cheryl who bring it to our forefront, and we're all richer as a result of it. Now, my question, people, the citizens of the Delia and Natchez, as you reflect back, are there moments or memories that still haunt you today or give you hope for our tomorrows?
Yes. And I didn't pull it out too much in the film. I wish I had. This was a mistake. But it's important to know that at different steps along the way of those people's journey, and making sure that those who came before them were honored, that people in the white community tried by hook or crook to stop it from happening. They would come up with, so you notice in the film, there were actually for 100 years, if you can imagine this, there were parallel Memorial Day ceremonies, one black and one white. Well, the white folks there didn't care anything about the black ceremony until the white one died out. Then suddenly was this revelation that we need to now control this. And they tried to stop it. The people, folks, they do it now again, but all these marchers, they would cook out, along the road, the side of the road, give water to the marchers, food and things. And, just, it made it a true celebration. The city said, well, that's a fire hazard. Can't do that. So the folks said, okay, we'll take that out. And then there was another cemetery director that came in, a female. And she started accusing them from the previous year, left beer bottles all over the place. It was just so when I asked her, I said, is there anything? They said, no. Let me tell you a little bit about this woman, Jim. Her great-grandfather or grandfather was a Confederate officer. I said, oh, well, that answers a lot. So yeah, there was that. And there was another male cemetery director who tried to do the same thing. He brought the, and so what has happened and what had happened for 150 years is the directors that were there honored their tradition. And that's what it is. It was their tradition, except when they no longer had their own tradition and they wanted to stop there. They persevered. I will tell you, Miss Margaret, they persevered. They knew that there were some tough times again, but as Frank Williams says he knows that he has a torch that he's carrying, and when it's his time to go in, someone else is going to be there to carry it. And boy, when I heard that, I was like, man, just being in his presence in that room to interview him that day was inspiring. I go back to that and I think back to that minute and that time when he was there. But I will tell you some funny stories too, because you got to get through this, I think, with humor. Is Frank told me that the one time the folks really got involved is, now they had been marching the same route for 150 years or whatever, right? Well, sometime in the 1970s, this one other cemetery director got involved, and without telling anyone, she, about halfway through, she changed the route that they had been walking for. This is Natchez, Mississippi. This is where part of that route, and it meant so much to the people, is because part of that route included where the slaves who came off of the ship would be marched down to the pens at the end of the outside of the city. And they're first, yeah, how do you, and or why do you really need to explain to someone, and I'm saying a white person in this case, that look, this means something to them. It's not the route could be shorter. They'll walk for 10 more hours. But the route is important. Well, the funny part is Frank was marching. You see how fast that he marches, and he was marching, and he told me, he said, next thing you know, Jim, I looked around and I said, where is everybody? Well, he kept walking to a fork, and he just stood there. You just picture him with his arms crossed. He stood there like this, and that's when he found out that this one woman had changed the route. And that's the only time it ever happened. Frank learned from that. He said that will never happen again, because he felt it was, and I feel with him, that it was a dishonor. How dare you do that? I hope I answered your question. I know I get a little animated at times, but I'm trying to carry their story, and I'm grateful to be here. I think, Cheryl, the one question that you said about 2021, when I think of when you think back to 2016, when here we were with a film where you saw, Black Americans marching over a bridge, that kind of biblical march from west to east over a river, all of that biblical stuff presented to me. And I want to mention something else too, folks, is prior to 1940, this is how much it meant to them. Prior to 1940, that bridge was not built. You know how the Vidalia folks got to the Natchez side of the river? They lined up ferries, and the people would get on the ferries, and they take people back and forth every day. I mean, wow. You don't mess with someone's history when there's that much conviction. You just don't. And one of the great stories too that I hope I captured was the importance of women to this. Remember the women marching in the white, I want to say gowns, but they were white dresses, and they looked so regal, but they were the auxiliaries to the Grand Army of the Republic, and their responsibility was everything else that no one else was doing. I mean, getting the word out, getting organizing. Okay, we're going to meet here at this church. This is what the women did, and what I learned, and which is why I was happy to show them, is they played such an important role, and still do, with the continuation of this tradition. And I got one funny story for you. You might remember the one lady. Okay, so there's three women sitting together in the pews. There's one that's in red, white, blue, and then there's one to the left in the white, and one to the right in white. I'm talking about the one to the right. I always miss her. I think it's Mary. Well, anyways, I was down there one weekend to do some interviews, and we were invited into her home for lunch. And I was like, oh wow, this is great. Well, here you're in the deep South. I mean, you're tables full of stuff, right? All kinds of food came out, and I was just overwhelmed at how much she had gone into putting this on. And I thanked her, and this is what she said to me. Only in the South will you hear this. She said, well, Mr. James, I just found out you were coming this morning. Had I known yesterday, I really would have cooked for you. And she meant it. Folks, I wish I had taken a picture of that table. So it meant a lot. It meant a lot. Sheila, you talk about access. These folks, rightfully so, are very protective of their history, because they know what can happen. And so, being a white male at a very contentious time, 2016, I needed an in. And Sheila, the lady I mentioned earlier, who worked at the National Cemetery and had been back for 12 years, but grew up there in Natchez, when she vouched for me, that was it. I had access to everything. And you know what? I was not, it actually put more pressure on it, because I just said, oh my God, I cannot get there. I hope they like. I'll never forget, we went back to the small church, and there was 15 of them that were in the film. I said, I just want to show it to you folks first. And I knew we had done a good thing when, after it was over, I gave Mr. Frank, of course, the floor first. And he stood up very, very, I didn't think I'd do this. He stood up, very proud man, And he said, and he didn't get any words out. He just did what I'm doing now. He tried to get out some words, and he sat back down because he broke out in tears. And that was the only person, the people in that room, I knew I had done it right. And yeah, that was, you talk about special moments and things like that. It was 5 years ago, folks, and I'm talking to you about it, blubbering. That's how much it meant. So thank you for that question.
My intent had not been to make you cry.
I know,
That's that question.
I know, but boy, all these emotions came up. I thank you so much for that question, because I to this day I still send down DVDs, and I had these rubber wristbands made, and if you 30th of May, and then on the back since 1866, and this is one from 2019, but sadly the string was broken. COVID stopped the event. I said to Mr. Frank, is there any other time that, or is there any time that it almost didn't happen? He said, yes, there was one. And it was a huge thunderstorm, and you saw the kids marching with all the horns and stuff and lightning. And the police stopped them at the base of the bridge on the Vidalia side and said, we can't go over. We can't do it, not with the kids. And so they turned around and they went back. And they went back to the church. And as Mr. Frank told me, people are really upset about it. And they got back to church, and the lightning had stopped, and the sun was trying to peek out. And Mr. Frank said, well, I'll tell you what, if there is one person that wants to walk across that big bridge with me, let's go. And everybody did. I'm mad at you, Miss Margaret. Everybody did. To a person, and it cleared. As he told the story, the weather cleared, and by the time they got to the Natchez side of the river, the sun was out. Divine. Nothing short of divine. And yeah, it was I'm so honored to be just a part of that every year. And I'm going back. I'm moving back to Mississippi, and I'm going to work virtual. Thank you, VA, for allowing me to do that. But Mississippi is not my home, but it is my adopted home. I'm going back, and I'm going to participate in that event every year that they'll have me. Quick funny story, because Mr. Frank was a funny guy. I told him in 2016, I said, Mr. Frank, I work right across the street from the White House. I said, I don't know if I can get that kind of, you know who the president is? He said, yeah. He said, I'll tell you what, if you get the president to come, he's going to start where every other newcomer starts, at the back of the line. And he said, but if Michelle comes, she can march with me at the front. So I always thought that was a great story, and he meant it. I'm pretty sure he meant it. Because there was an incident one time when, the Patriot Guard riders that everyone's familiar with, I think. There's about 30 of them, and I understood why they wanted to be in the front. Because they were Harleys, and Harleys are often air-cooled, and their engines can overheat, especially in Mississippi weather. But the committee, led by Mr. Frank, said, I'm sorry. These were mostly white Patriot Guard riders. I do believe their intent was pure, and they wanted to honor the event, and there was a reason they needed to be out front for what I just mentioned. But you know what? Mr. Frank was not going to give away 140 years of history because your engine might overcool or overheat. He just wasn't going to give it away like that. And so, you walk away from meeting people like that have such conviction that you're in the presence of something and someone special. Got a question here about the connection to the community in the South. My connection personally, or mine, just living there. When I went there in 2012, I'd come from Wisconsin. And, the first thing I looked up about Mississippi, I want to know how many alligators there were. Whatever. I did see a few, but that was the strangest thing. But I thought, this white guy coming down from Wisconsin, he's got an MBA, and boy, he's going to run things in a couple of years. Well, this white man, young man at the time, learned a life lesson. One, everybody I knew had a master's degree in that hospital. I wasn't anyone special. And two, that the mission meant as much to everyone there, as it did anywhere that I went. And I don't know why I thought it would be different, but I did, and it wasn't. And so, when you learn these life lessons, sometimes you're just thankful that you have the opportunity to learn them. And on top of that, you can see them so clearly. It was so clear to me how much I needed to readjust my thinking about my worldview. And Jackson, Mississippi brought that to me. And so my connection is a professional, but it is also very personal because of the history, but as much so because of the people that I met. Who, conversely, now you got to think about this. Not only do this whole symbiotic relationship between people isn't just me. They had to accept me too. It just wasn't a one-way street. And so it was, that's my connection. My connection to the history there is where it starts for me, because I'm a historian by training. But then the history becomes friendship, and friendships last a lifetime. They do. The good ones do.
Well, it is a little after 8 now, so if anyone has any final thoughts or statements.
May I make one more statement, if I may?
Yes, ma'am.
Jim mentioned that he got a degree from Jackson State University. That's a historically Black college and university. Right. My assumption is that the majority of students at the time you were there were also minority students. Is that a correct statement?
Well, only if you reverse that I was the minority.
No, I meant in terms of.
Oh, in terms. Oh, yeah, it's cool. Okay.
But still primarily a Black university.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's about 10,000 students, and I think I asked one time, and the white students and or other was about 500, 600. Right. So yeah, I was able to learn. Right. One short story about learning at Jackson State. Can I share that with y'all? I'll be real quick, I promise. So I'm sitting in this class and we're talking about the 2016 election, and I'm talking because I think I know everything. And I say, I don't understand why women who are 50% of the population, why they don't just all vote for the same person one way or another, and they would dominate the election. So that's me pontificating. There was a young lady, black female, maybe 22, sitting next row over and two back. Now, folks, she's very shy, hasn't uttered a peep during this whole course. She raises her hand. Even the professors looked at her and said, I forget her name. Let's just say Julia. Oh, Julia, would you like to add something? And I kind of turn, I'm like, okay, it's going to be interesting. And she says, I have something to say to you. I was like, whoa, me? I thought I was on your side. What do you mean me? You know, and I'm thinking that. She said, I just want you to know, I understand what you're saying, but I also want you to know that I have very little in common with a 50-year-old white woman. And that was, you know, her position as a young black female, as being a younger person. And, you know, me, I was willing to whitewash all of that and just say, hey, you're women, you're all the same gender, vote. It's one of the best education. You know what? Of all the things I was educated on in Jackson State, I remember that's the first story I tell. That's what I remember. And this young lady gave me a life lesson. Never forgot it. Never.
Well, I have thousands of more questions, but we'll leave that to another month.
I heard that someone mentioned Cheryl Daria. Did I get it right? Miss Margaret. That so my other film, The Hello Girls, is a kind of a World War I themed. And if you're willing to do it, and maybe it's even different with respect to COVID, I'd be more than happy to show you that film about World War I women. So it's up to you. I live here in DC, so let's do it if you want.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. Maybe we can work something out with the museum.
Yeah, and let's not forget the 688 anytime. I mean, you know, folks, we might very soon announce that they both houses, both chambers of Congress have passed that legislation. The Senate already has, like I mentioned earlier. Still waiting on the House, but they'll get it done this year, and that might be a good time to re-show that if you want. I mean, it's been. You know, this has been so exhilarating for me. I've run the gamut of emotions, and I didn't. Thank you so much, folks, because I didn't know that was all still in there, and it is. And I want to thank you for bringing that out, and it's been such an honor to see everyone, speak with everyone, and you let me speak for 45 minutes. Who can argue with that, huh? All right. So I'm at your disposal. Let me know.
All right, great. Well, thank you again, Jim, and thank you to Margaret and Cheryl as well, and to everyone in the audience who came to this event. I hope to see you all in the future at the museum or at other events.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.